In this video, we will talk about input and output redirection. Like pipelines, we have ways to redirect the standard in and the standard out, and we also have a way to redirect standard error to files. For the examples in this video, we're going to be using the mlb40.csv file found in your working files directory. Let's talk about redirecting standard out first. Let's say we want to find all the names of the American League players who have hit 40 or more home runs in a season. And we want to look at their names. So we're going to say the field separator is a comma, and we want the first field. And we're going to sort that, and we're going to get a count. And then we're going to sort that list numerically and sort it from highest total to lowest total. We get a list that's a lot bigger than a screen. The only thing that fits on the screen are the one season guys. We could pipe it to less, but maybe we want to save that output. Maybe we want to hang on to that. So here's what we do. At the end of our line, we use a greater than character. I like to think of it as a funnel. So think of we're taking everything from this pipeline, and then we're going to funnel it out, and we'll just call it players.txt. So now we have a file. I can do less on players.txt, and here's all our players, Babe Ruth at the top of the list, a bunch of guys with one at the bottom of the list. And you notice when we ran the command, we didn't get the output. We took that output and we sent it to that file instead. We've redirected standard out. That's the term, and that's exactly what we're doing. Let's say I wanted to add the National League players to the list. So I go to this command, back up, do National League, and do the same thing. Where's Babe Ruth? Well, what happened here is that greater than symbol says, here's the actual logic behind what happens with the greater than. If the file does not exist, create it. If it does exist, truncate it, wipe out its contents, and then write all of your output to this file. So when we ran the National League, we wiped out all the data from the American League. What if I wanted to add? What if I wanted to have both in that file? Very simple. Let's go back up to the American League line. And if instead of a single greater than, we put 2, 2 means append. So append to the file. Now, if the file doesn't exist, it'll be created. Everything's cool, just like with the single greater than. But if the file has something in it, the 2 greater thans says append to the file. Stick it on the end of the file. So if we do that, and now we look at players.txt, we have our National League players, and then we start with the American League, starting with Babe Ruth, and they go in order. So let's talk about another kind of output redirection. And for this, I'm going to use a grep command in a way that will generate errors. Let me get rid of piazza.txt. That was from trying it before. I have this directory called stuff, and I just made the directory. It's an empty directory. And the reason I'm putting that directory there is so that I'll get an error from grep. And here's the error I will get. Let's say we want to grep for Mike Piazza. And I'm going to use an asterisk, often pronounced as star. I'm going to grep Piazza in star. And star just means all the files in the directory. So we're going to grep for Mike Piazza, and instead of specifying the file, we're going to say grep for him in everything. So grep for him in mlb40.csv, grep for him in players.txt, and grep for him in stuff. There's a reason I got rid of piazza.txt that we'll get to in a minute. When I do that, I get some results. Grep says, hey, you looked in more than one file, so I'm going to tell you what file I found it in. I found him twice in mlb40.csv. I found him once in players.txt. And I could not search stuff because stuff's a directory, not a file. That last line is actually an error from grep. It's not part of the output. And we can see that very easily if I do piazza.txt. I send the output to piazza.txt. When I do that, the error comes out to my screen and the output goes to piazza.txt. What if I want to also send the output to somewhere? I can do that. And we do that with a 2. The standard input, standard out, and standard error are 3 things that are always open anytime a Linux program is running. And each file our program has open gets a unique number. And those 3 always have the same numbers. And they are considered files in Linux. So standard in is always file 0. Standard out is always file 1. And standard error is always file 2. Any other files that get opened start at 3, 4, 5, etc. By default, the greater than and the double greater than, they assume we're talking about standard output. So we don't need to specify which file we're talking about sending to those files. By default, we're sending standard output. When we want to send something other than standard output, like standard error, we have to put the number in front of it. So that's what the 2 is doing there. 2 greater than piazza.error says send file descriptor 2, which is standard error, to this other file. Now when I do that, cat piazza.text, it's got my output, piazza.error, and grep input file piazza.text is also the output, is why I removed the file that was sitting there before we started. This grep is actually smart enough to know that you're looking for something in a file and then putting that output into that same file. In the good old days, when I was first learning this stuff, I had done something like this and I created an infinite loop. So it was finding the thing in the file and appending it to the file and finding it later where it had appended it in the file and appending it to the file. And I found out when someone else yelled at me because I had just used up the entire disk space on the system I was working on. So it's nice that it's a little more sophisticated now and it actually can detect that condition and just give you an error about it. But that's why I deleted the piazza.txt when we first started. I didn't want to confuse the issue. Now we have the output and the error in 2 different files, and these are completely independent things. I can grep piazza star and I can say just do the error. So the standard out goes, the standard error is still there. It's actually a common enough thing to want to not see errors, to hide errors. And there's a special way to do that. Grep piazza, and we can send to a special file. That file is called dev_null. The directory dev has a whole bunch of device files, different kinds of special things for Linux. All your disks are there, your network's there, memory's there, all kinds of things. But there's also this special file called dev_null. And what dev_null is a file, you can write stuff to it, and it essentially gets thrown away. Anytime you cat dev_null, it's completely empty. It's always empty no matter how much you write to it. The stuff you write to it is essentially just thrown away. It disappears. This direction right here, out to dev_null, is a standard way of saying, I don't want to see the output. Maybe you don't want to see any of the output. Maybe you don't want to see the errors. Maybe you only want to see the errors. You don't want to see the standard out, something like that. If you want to throw something away, send it to dev_null. That's a very common standard thing to do on Linux. There's one more output formula that we want to talk about, and that's redirecting both standard out and standard error to the same place. Let's just remove piazza.text and piazza.error. So we have a clean directory. We still have our stuff so that we will get an error. We're going to grep piazza again. We're going to send the output to piazza.text. And maybe I want to see the standard error as well. I want to see both my errors and my output in the same file. We use this little formula, 2 greater than &1. And what that says is send file descriptor 2, standard error, to the same place that file descriptor 1, standard out, is going, which in this case is piazza.text. So we do that. We have a typo. We need to tell it where to search. By default, grep is going to look in standard input, so it was waiting for me to type something. So let's do it again with the proper argument. Grep for piazza in all the files. We're going to send the output to piazza.text, and we're going to send the standard error to the same place. Command comes right back. No output. If we look, there's piazza.text. If we cat piazza.text, we get the error and we get the output. This one does matter. The order does matter. Let's do it in the other order, and I'll show you what I mean. If we do it this way, now we see the errors. They didn't go to the file. Up here, we said grep piazza in all the files, put the standard out to piazza.text, and put the standard error to the same place, piazza.text. Basically, you read these left to right. We're going to look for piazza in all the files. We're going to send standard error to wherever standard out is going. That's the screen. That's the terminal. And then we're going to send standard out to piazza.text. We actually told standard error to go to the screen, and then we told standard out to go to the file. So order does matter there. Generally speaking, if you just think of the 2 greater than &1 as going at the end of the line, you will be okay. The final thing to talk about is input redirection. A lot of commands will read from standard in or read from the keyboard, and we can tell them to do that from a file instead. So let's just do a quick example. This is a little less common. There are times when it's useful, though. The example we would give will unfortunately not be all that useful, but let's grep for Babe Ruth and say, take your standard input from the mlb40.csv. Now that gives us the exact same results as if I hadn't used the file. But there's two very different things going on here. So let's talk about those. In this one, the standard one, we are telling the grep command to open the file mlb40.csv, then grep for Ruth in that file. In the second command, grep is only seeing grep for Babe Ruth. So grep is being told to use its standard input. That's the default input for grep if we don't specify a file. Well, how does it get that? That top one is absolutely functionally equivalent to this. That's effectively what's really happening. The contents of that file are coming in as standard input to the grep command, and then the grep command is looking for Ruth. You can redirect standard in, standard out, standard error. The output redirections definitely are things that you'll use more often, but there are times when you'd like for standard in to be coming from a file, and there's a way to do that as well.